everybody, welcome to the Briefing Room. I'm Devin Dwyer at ABC News in Washington. Great to have you with us on this Wednesday. A lot going on in Washington. I'm joined by Quinn Owen, our immigration reporter. Great to have you, Quinn. We were just watching an extraordinary hearing today, several hours of testimony by the Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen. Her first appearance before a Democratic-controlled committee in the House of Representatives. And there were so many questions, Quinn, not only about the treatment of migrants in custody, the president's emergency declaration, children in detention centers, but these numbers, which the administration just released in the past 24 hours, showing a remarkable surge of migrants apprehended at the southern border in the month of February, and a record number of families, Quinn, 66,000 individuals, but 36,000 family units, and that's a record.
That's right. The number of family units is really the thing to note here, because overall the increase in migrants coming to the border, the general number, isn't entirely unprecedented. There were similar flows, similar high flows, even some higher totals during the Bush administration. But the challenge that is presented in recent months is the increase of family units, because, of course, when you have kids that end up in CPB custody, Customs and Border Protection, they run into issues with the length of time that they have to detain them. There's a limit on how long you can keep a kid in U.S. custody. And there's also a whole variety of medical issues that come up in having to deal with.
Yeah, very delicate situation. And the Homeland Security Secretary today was defending the agency's treatment of these families and these children, saying they're a law enforcement agency. They weren't set up to handle family units, detained family units. She also was pushing back on criticism of that policy of separating parents from their children, which has since ended, but was certainly controversial a few months back. We'll get into that today here on the show, but want to start with a member of the committee is joining us now, Republican of Arizona, Debbie Lesko, sits on the House Homeland Security Committee. Congresswoman, it's great to see you. I want to start about asking you about the president's emergency declaration and his efforts to secure $8 billion in funding for the wall. You heard the secretary talk a little bit about that today. As the president embarks on this effort, are you confident that that amount of money is sufficient? And how much of the wall is going to be, new wall will be built in Arizona?
Yes, I support the president because we do have a crisis at our southern border. As you just said, I'm from the state of Arizona, a border state. I've been down to the border and I've talked to the boots on the ground, the Customs and Border Patrol agents and their supervisors, the officials, and I asked them straight out, do we need a fence as part of the solution to this crisis? They said yes. And then if you heard me in committee today, I asked Secretary Nielsen if she believes that there is a crisis, an emergency in our southern border, and she said yes, and that she supports the president's declaration. I believe he was forced to do it. Now, as far as the amount of money, I think this is going to be a good start. I've been told by Department of Homeland Security, they have given us a list of the prioritized areas where they want to build the wall first, and one of those areas is in Yuma, Arizona. And so there's quite a bit in Texas, but I think Yuma, Arizona will get some of the fence built there as well.
Wow. Any idea how soon they'll break ground in that sector?
I do not know how soon that will break ground. Now, first, of course, the president has statutory authority to transfer some of the monies without a declaration of emergency, but I hope that he can get all of the money. I think part of this is going to be tied up in the courts and ultimately probably go to the United States Supreme Court for that decision. But, you know, again, I've been down to the border. I'm from a border state. There is a crisis at our border, and as you have said in this newscast, is that our immigration laws also have to be changed, because what's happening is our loose asylum laws are actually incentivizing thousands of people to come to the United States because they know that once they cross the border, ask for asylum, and if they bring children with them, that they can only be held in custody for 20 days. And that's part of the system. They know our laws. The cartels are giving them tips on how to take advantage of our laws. And it's really bad because 1 out of every 3 women that are the migrants that are coming these thousands of miles is being sexually assaulted. Today you heard from Secretary Nielsen that they have to test girls as young as 10 years old with pregnancy tests because they're afraid that they've been sexually assaulted by these coyotes that are, doing human trafficking, getting paid about $6,000 per person to cart these people thousands of miles. It's a real humanitarian crisis.
It was truly stunning to hear her say that.
Yes.
Also, her talking about the need that she's going to have to medically test all these children because so many are crossing with medical conditions and injuries and the like. I want to ask you to drill down a little bit on the administration's strategy to try to get their arms around this. One approach they took, as you know well, from a year ago was what the administration called a zero tolerance policy. As these families came across, they in many cases separated children from their parents because, as you noted, children can't be put in jails and prisons under federal law, so they have to be held in separate places, and that caused this crisis. Democrats have been so critical of that policy. I want to start by playing just a little bit of one exchange with the Secretary today over this issue and ask your response.
Were you aware that the zero tolerance policy would lead to minors being separated from their parents, yes or no?
As we increase consequences for those who break the law, just as everywhere.
Look, I have such limited time, Madam Secretary. Okay. I'm sure you can appreciate that.
As a consequence for a parent going to jail, we in this country do not take the children to jail.
Okay. So I take that as a yes, that you understood that the zero tolerance policy was going to lead to minors being separated from their parents.
As it has in the last 3 administrations.
Yes. Okay. So the answer is yes.
A lot of passion there. Congresswoman Debbie Lesko of Arizona. Are you satisfied, based on what you've heard and seen, with how the administration has handled these children?
Well, that was in the past. As you know, the zero tolerance policy, the president changed that after he got bipartisan pushback when children were separated from their parents. So now I believe there's only 6 children that haven't been reunited with the parents or some type of guardian, and that's because they literally can't find them. There's certain legal situations. So that situation was from a while ago. Last year, it's been rectified. I have gone to some of these homes that take care of unaccompanied children, and I have to say that the ones that I've went to, there was one in Virginia, and it's very well run, very nice facility. They educate the children, very nice accommodations, and they're waiting there until they can be placed in a sponsor home. It's usually with relatives, but Department of Homeland Security, as Secretary Nielsen says, has to check out the background of these sponsors to make sure that the home is safe for these children. Again, this is really a crisis, and Congress really needs to work in a bipartisan fashion to change the laws, because you can build fences, which I approve of. I think fence is part of the answer. You could have more Border Patrol agents, but you also need to change our immigration laws.
And Congresswoman, indeed, this is an issue that needs a lot of bipartisan attention. You've been a leader on that, on that front, no doubt. And I appreciate your time. We'll be circling back with you on that front. Before we let you go, though, I do need to ask you about some breaking news just a few minutes ago in the Senate Armed Services Committee. Your colleague, Senator Martha McSally, Republican of Arizona, someone you know very well, a military veteran, was just testifying about sexual assault in the United States military. You are chairwoman, Republican chairwoman of the Congressional Caucus on Women's Issues, also a member of the Air Force Caucus. Know Martha McSally well. She said that she was actually raped back during her time of service by a superior in the military. I want to get your reaction to her very public and personal testimony and how you're tracking that issue right now.
Well, I hope I'm going to see her in a little while so I can give her a hug and tell her how sorry I am, because these type of things can affect you the rest of your life. I'm a survivor of domestic violence, and so I've had other issues, but this is a huge issue, not only in the military, but across all sectors. We need to address issues of women being sexually abused and domestic violence, and that's one of the issues I do want to work on in a bipartisan fashion on our Women's Caucus. And so I can't wait to see her and give her a hug and tell her that I feel for her. I don't know exactly what she's going through, but you know, it's unfortunately this happens to so many women throughout America.
All right, Debbie Lesko, Republican Congresswoman of Arizona, also on the House Homeland Security Committee. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time and perspective, Congresswoman. Thank you. And just before we spoke with Debbie Lesko, we also spoke with a Democrat on the committee, Quinn, Congressman Lou Correa of California, who offered his take on the Secretary's testimony today. Let's take a listen. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us. What surprised you most by the Secretary's testimony today, her first appearance before your Democratic majority on the committee?
That's control. I think she had some good statements today. She tried to make a good argument for the President's emergency declaration. Sadly, she couldn't make that point. And as you know, right now, Congress is getting ready to vote to rebuke the President on his emergency declaration. And both Democrats and Republicans are probably going to vote against the president.
Sir, she faced a lot of questions about the separation policy. She faced questions about the care of these migrants. She faced questions about asylum seekers. Was there anything new that you heard in her testimony in response to questions about how those things are being implemented?
Well, she tried to talk about the emergency at the border numbers, but what was interesting to me is she began to kind of tell us a little bit about the real crisis in Americas, not in the United States, but in the Americas. As you know, right now, there's probably 2 million refugees, Venezuelan to Colombian, and a whole lot many people in Central America, refugees from there as well. The issue isn't a border challenge, a border emergency. The issue is that in the Americas today, we have a refugee crisis. And I don't think the president has talked about that yet. The solution to this crisis in the Americas is to work with our neighbors, work with Mexico, work with Canada, Central America, to give people hope of staying at home, secure households, a future in terms of economically being secure. That's what we need to work on. The Secretary started talking a little bit about that. She started talking about folks having to flee their nations, but she didn't quite get there because, you know, her job is to back the president. And unfortunately, the facts do not back up the president.
Our thanks to Congressman Lou Correa of California. For more of an on-the-ground perspective right now, I want to go to our affiliate reporter, Marissa Armas. She's down in Albuquerque, New Mexico, has been covering border issues for KOAT, an ABC affiliate there. Marissa, great to see you. I want to ask you what impact this surge of families and children, we've been talking about these record numbers, what impact that's having on your community and how folks there are responding?
Well, the impact that it's having on our communities really just depends what part of the state you're going to. So New Mexico is an interesting area because if you're going to Republican strongholds such as Otero County or Hidalgo County, people say that it is a problem. But if you're going to areas like Santa Teresa or Las Cruces, they say that it's not. In Santa Teresa, you have to remember that they do have a barrier in place, and there are actually churches there on the ground that are trying to help migrants get back on their feet. But this is also an area that has resources. But when you look at another part of the state, like I had mentioned in Hidalgo County, this is an area where they say there aren't enough resources. Ranchers say that they fear for their safety. They say that the person that they're seeing in their backyard are drug traffickers. They're saying that their medical facilities are being overran by immigrants. So what we're seeing there is entirely different. Now, just a couple months ago, the Hidalgo County manager actually sent out a letter to our state lawmakers begging for help in that area because she says that the situation there is getting very bad. She says that, one, there aren't enough people on the ground. She says that medical facilities are overrun. And she says that even the roads from all of the Border Patrol going back and forth from Lordsburg to Antelope Wells is taking a toll on their county. Now, eventually, after several weeks, the governor did get back and responded to that letter. She did send eventually 6 state police officers out to that area to monitor the area, but she says that she wants to see data. Now, the hard thing about the data is that ranchers say when they only have 4 county sheriffs monitoring this area, it's really hard for these limited officers to get out there when they might see someone on their land or see stuff in their barn area. So again, the county manager's big concern is that this situation is going to get a lot worse, and when it does, she says that she's not sure they're going to have the resources to handle it.
Yeah, very remote areas, difficult areas to police, as we've been hearing. Hospitals not nearby many of those border outposts, and a lot of the ranchers you've been talking to, Marissa, have complained, begging for resources from Washington. Marissa Armas, thanks for that reporting and perspective from our Albuquerque, New Mexico affiliate, KOAT. Appreciate your time. And Quinn, you've been spending some time outside the remote areas at actual ports of entry, and they are facing an influx as well.
Yes, at these ports of entries where more families and children are coming up, some of them just aren't designed to handle this level of flow. In some cases, they have to convert different parts of the facilities, like bathrooms, into holding centers. They have supply cabinets stocked with diapers, blankets, all sorts of things that kids need to get by. The bottleneck ends up being when those kids have to then, eventually get out of custody because you do have this 20-day limit.
A very difficult situation. Thanks for your reporting. We know you'll stay on it. Quinn Owen with ABC News, and our thanks to our whole team covering this issue. A lot more at abcnews.com and on the ABC News app. Moving on now to some other major news just breaking just before we came to air on North Korea. In the past 24 hours, a nonprofit group here in Washington that obtained some commercial satellite imagery found out that North Korea has actually rapidly begun rebuilding a missile launch site just in the past few days, just after President Trump returned from his summit with Kim Jong-un in Vietnam. For more on this now, I want to bring in our State Department reporter, Connor Finnegan, who's been tracking the latest images. Connor, give us a summary of what we're seeing and how significant this is.
It's actually really significant, Devin. This is a key missile engine test site for the North Korean regime. As you said, newly released commercial satellite images showing that it's being rebuilt, essentially. North Korea had begun to dismantle it last year as part of a promise to the South Koreans and to President Trump. But in recent days, we're not quite sure when it began, but they began a rapid rebuilding of the facility.
All right, Connor, thanks for that. I want to go now over to the White House to our Karen Travers, White House correspondent, who asked the president about these images just coming in. Karen, what did he have to say about this?
Well, Devin, of course, there was no major breakthrough last week in Hanoi after the president's summit with Kim Jong-un. But he said last week that Kim promised him he would not restart the nuclear and missile test. I asked him just a few moments ago in the Oval Office if North Korea was breaking that promise. Here's what he had to say.
It's a very early report. We're the ones that put it out. But I would be very, very disappointed in Chairman Kim, and I don't think I will be, but we'll see what happens. We'll take a look. It'll ultimately get solved.
And Devin, the president points to North Korea hitting the pause button on those sites as a key sign of progress, really the big sign of progress since the first summit in Singapore last summer. Of course, Kim Jong-un has not taken steps to dismantle his weapons program. And if this is true, that they're restarting and rebuilding this site and perhaps gearing up to start tests again, this would be a major setback. You heard the president there say he'd be very disappointed.
Yeah, this as the president also announced he's dialing back some of those military exercises off the Korean Peninsula. Very interesting. Karen Travers, thanks for your reporting from the Oval Office. Appreciate that. One last question for Connor Finnegan as Karen talks there about the significance of what this test would mean. Connor, remind us when the last time we saw a missile test from North Korea and what are State Department and Pentagon officials saying about the possibility of another launch?
Well, the last time North Korea launched an intercontinental ballistic missile was in November 2017, before all of this rapprochement, before these, warming relations between the president and Kim Jong-un. It's been an important part to the president to not have this sort of tangible example of North Korea's weapons program. Since the Singapore summit, they've taken steps to commit to not do these launches, as the president said. In his meeting with Kim Jong-un, he got a personal pledge, but to not have it in writing, to not have a declaration come out of Hanoi was really a failure, according to a lot of analysts, because it didn't codify this pause in testing.
So a lot of nervous eyes watching the skies over the Korean Peninsula and that satellite imagery as well. Connor Finnegan for us at the State Department. Big story on North Korea today. Thank you for that, Connor. Now a note from the Supreme Court and the battle over the 2020 census. Some breaking news also this afternoon out of a federal court in California. A second judge now has ruled that the Trump administration's decision to add a citizenship question to the 2020 census is illegal and unconstitutional. This judge specifically is singling out Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross for violating the Administrative Procedures Act. In doing this, they said that he was arbitrary and capricious in deciding to ask people their citizenship. This is setting the stage for a major case before the Supreme Court next month. A big case, a lot on the line for the 2020 census, and we'll be following it right here. Finally today, another very interesting story, this one involving President Trump and his presidential daily intelligence briefing. Our Lee Farron now, who's one of our intelligence reporters, joins us here. Lee, a lot of attention on the president's intelligence briefing, especially when we talk about North Korea and all the things that he should be presumably paying attention to. And you've obtained a rare statement from both the DNI and the CIA director overnight, pushing back on a whole bunch of myths around the president's brief. Tell us about that.
It's unusual, but I'd like to put the statement up if we could. The heart of it's right at the top. And assertions made in several recent media stories about the president's daily brief are false, unproductive, and harmful to our nation's security. They go on to say that speculation of the Oval Office meetings is wrong, and they describe President Trump as engaged and knowledgeable on the most complex national security issues.
It's pretty amazing that they have to, our top intelligence officials have to put out a statement saying that the president is engaged.
Right.
If you doubted that, sort of interesting on its own. What prompted this? Do we have any idea?
Well, that's the unusual thing. I went to the ODNI and I went to the CIA and I asked, why now? Why put the statement out now? And they won't say. They basically lead you to believe that it's in response to a series of stories. Now, for the past 2 years, there have been reporting about
right, and we've reported on some of that here as well. The president likes shortened briefings. He likes things that are visual. He doesn't like long documents. Some of that's sort of been in the public
and he said so himself,
ether.
That he prefers if you can get to the point kind of a thing. What a few recent stories may have gone a little bit further. One out of Time magazine said that the president was behaving with will for ignorance when it comes to some of the briefings and outright rejecting some intelligence assessments. More recently, the New York Times reported that briefers are framing their briefs by economics and trade deals so they can answer the question that Trump always asks, who's winning? So it leads you to believe this statement that came out of the ODNI and the CIA was just in response to those, saying that all this reporting about what's going on in these very highly classified briefings is speculation.
And since we've got you here, we're over 2 years into the Trump administration. He has been so critical of the intelligence agencies, particularly the brass. So many episodes over the past couple of years. You talk to a lot of these people off the record, privately, intelligence officials at both the DNI, CIA, elsewhere. What's sort of the mood right now about President Trump and how he views intelligence?
Kind of what you get the most when you ask that kind of question is they say they're keeping their heads down, they're doing the work, and they're not going to let the politics get in the way of it. Every now and then they kind of step out of that. When President Trump criticized ODNI Coates for some testimony recently, Coates put out a statement saying we stand by it. This statement, you have kind of the opposite. You have the ODNI and the CIA backing the president. So I think from their perspective, they're going to do the work.
Very interesting stuff, and you have a great story up on abcnews.com right now as well. Lee Farron, thanks so much for that reporting on the intelligence agencies. And finally, back to that story we told you about just a little while ago, this stunning admission by Republican Senator Martha McSally of Arizona that she herself had been sexually assaulted by a superior when she was in the United States Air Force. Martha McSally, we should note, was the first female fighter pilot to serve in the U.S. military. I'd like to share with you now, here's the moment from her testimony talking about her experience.
So, like you, I am also a military sexual assault survivor. But unlike so many brave survivors, I didn't report being sexually assaulted. Like so many women and men, I didn't trust the system at the time. I blamed myself. I was ashamed and confused. I thought I was strong, but felt powerless. The perpetrators abused their position of power in profound ways. And in one case, I was preyed upon and then raped by a superior officer. I stayed silent for many years, but later in my career, as the military grappled with scandals and their wholly inadequate responses, I felt the need to let some people know I too was a survivor. I was horrified at how my attempt to share generally my experiences were handled. I almost separated from the Air Force at 18 years over my despair. Like many victims, I felt the system was raping me all over again.
Just quite compelling and emotional testimony from Martha McSally. For more on this, I want to bring in our Pentagon reporter, Louis Martinez. Louis, what's the Pentagon, I know this has just happened, but what's the Pentagon saying about her testimony and her allegations? She didn't name the officer, right?
That's right. I mean, I just want to clarify one thing. She was the first female fighter pilot in combat, not the first female fighter pilot. We contacted the Air Force once we heard her compelling testimony. The Air Force told us that they were aware of her comments, but they were looking into it. As we gathered from what she told us there in those, it was essentially her opening statement. She said that she never reported, she never stepped forward with it. Like countless others in the military who were victims of sexual assault, this is an issue that the Pentagon takes very seriously. They really want victims to step forward because they want them to have the care that is available to them, both in a medical way and also in a psychological way, as well as in prosecutorial assistance, because they want to see the perpetrators of these acts to face justice. They want accountability for these individuals. So the Pentagon taking it very seriously, but again, let's remember, they are always measuring the incidence of sexual assault year by year, and the numbers seem to be increasing. Just alone in this year alone, we are expecting the report to come out in a couple of, by the end of the spring, and what we know, we have parameters to go by. There was a sexual assault report in the military service academies. There was a 50% spike in the incidence there. However, there was not an increase in the number of victims stepping forward. From last year's report, we know that there was a 10% increase in the number of reports. So the incidence of sexual assault seem to be going up, and yet it's despite all the best efforts here at the Pentagon.
Louis Martinez for us at the Pentagon. Thanks so much for that, Louis. And want to also bring into the conversation our correspondent, Stephanie Ramos, a member of the military. Stephanie, I was struck by something Louis said there that, you know, sort of the military's been encouraging more women to come forward. Here's Martha McSally sort of setting an example on a very big stage and a very bright spotlight to come out like that. Can you give us a sense from your experience and what you know how the military has been sort of responding to this influx in allegations? What sort of programs do they have in place now?
Absolutely, Devin. So this is certainly going to be something that resonates with every branch of the military, both active and reserve. We know that for the last several years, the Department of Defense has tried to implement these programs and designated certain individuals to be that person to take in the reports from women and from men. As Louis mentioned, this is something that they continue to work on. And for instance, in the Army, at my particular reserve unit, we've got a SHARP representative, which stands for Sexual Harassment Assault Response Prevention Team. So they've got that one person there that the unit as a whole knows if anything happens to them, if they need to talk to someone, they can go and talk to that person. So across all of the military branches, these programs are put in place so victims of sexual assault and sexual harassment can come forward and they can fix the problem. But as Senator McSally said, this has been going on for quite some time and the military has a long way to go. Devin?
They sure do, but great to see more women coming forward. Stephanie Ramos for us in New York, thank you. And thanks to all of you for joining us here on ABC News Live in the Briefing Room. We're here every day at 3:30 Eastern Time with the latest political headlines. Hope you download the ABC News app to follow all the stories we've talked about today. A lot on that app. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. We'll see you back here tomorrow.